Now I know the secret why all your guests love you. Well, Paul, again, this might surprise you or maybe not, but I, even now at my 46 years of age, I'm not sure I stopped being a kid. Switzerland is a dream country, just to say it loud and clear.
Maybe one of the most important things that I always say, we should not expect the good deeds to come back from the same people that we made the good deeds for. And this is the big change that we have to have on all of us, on our personal level, so that we end up having this integrity where we say, okay, even though it's not ours, there's a thing which is not right happening, so we have to help somehow to correct it.
A Swiss company still needs to show that there was no Swiss person that could perform that job, and therefore they had to opt for a European individual. But that's Switzerland. You want to live in a first-class country, you have to pay first-class prices. And the first thing that I found, Paul, and that again I had never lived this before, was that there is competition for apartment. Part of that is really, it comes from us. No, we need to make an effort to get interested about the culture and the people. And we were saying, learn some words in that language. One of my surprises, Paul, was bread. Bread is something that I cannot explain how magnificent it is. You know, anything and everything related to nature, because Switzerland is such a beautiful place. If you like nature, the thing that I would tell them, Paul, is do it. Don't listen to the fear that's coming over and over in your head. 6 years later, I'm very bothered by people listening to music in their AirPods.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Whereabouts Tales. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Esteban Politura, an inspiring expat who has traveled an incredible path from Mexico to the UK for studies and now working as an expat in Switzerland. Whether he's starting over in a new country or embracing the unknown, Esteban's journey is a testament to pushing boundaries and making the most of every opportunity. Let's dive in. I will link Esteban's socials in the show notes caption below. Esteban, hi and welcome to the Whereabouts Tales podcast. Happy that you took the time.
On the contrary, Paul, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here with you, and very excited about all the things that we will be speaking about.
Yeah, it's the same here. Being an expat myself in the last 10 years, I gathered a lot of interesting stories, and I thought I'm for sure not the only one. And I thought, okay, it's only fair that I can find also expats like me in the same situation, and then we can exchange these stories, because I think it's easier when we discuss from the same point of view. And on the other side, I think it would be interesting for the world, because I think there are people who are thinking about this step, and I think it's important that we share some of our experience, adding some value to those persons.
Absolutely, Paul. And you said something very, very important. Being an expat sounds like an adventure, but then in reality, we realize it's not that easy.
Exactly, correct. So, Esteban, first of all, your name is it kind of gives a bit up of your background. So, being also from Romania, I'm able to read, let's say, the origin of a Spanish name. Could you be so kind and share a bit of your background?
Yes, of course, Paul. And you pronounce Esteban perfectly. So thanks for that. Indeed, my name is from a Spanish origin. I'm Mexican, and Esteban, of course, is not a very common, but a name that you often find in Latin America. I grew up in Mexico practically all my life, and my first experience as an expat was when I moved to the UK to study my postgraduate degrees. So that was my first experience. Not an easy one. We can speak about it later if you want, but then my second chance to be an expat in a proper way was when I moved to Switzerland 6 years ago. and it has been a great story so far, Paul.
Esteban, what did spark your curiosity to move abroad?
Yes, well, I actually moved to Switzerland because I was hired by a bank, a Swiss bank. I was previously working in Mexico for another bank, in that case, another Swiss bank, one of the large ones. So I moved to Switzerland to keep working in the financial industry and perform my regular tasks, the ones that I've been performing for the last 26 years in banking. So that was really the reason. And of course, after my move and when I saw how many expats were in a similar situation as I was, that's when I decided to get more into the expat story.
That sounds interesting, and I have to come back a step, Esteban, and ask you what brought you to the UK first for study? What was the impulse? Was that a special degree that you can only do, a special program that you can only do in UK, or what was the reason behind it?
No, actually, a great question, Paul, because I was basically almost finishing my undergraduate studies in Mexico. I was studying business administration. And I remember back then trying to find a job, Paul, and it was horrific. And I'm sure many people seeing this podcast and listening to this podcast will find things in common. It was horrible simply because every time that I wanted to find a job, I always got that comment: "You don't have enough experience. You don't have enough studies." No? So that's when I said, okay, if I need to study, and part of the pushback was, you don't have experience abroad. So imagine with 20 years, what kind of experience can you have? So my only chance to have experience abroad was to study, to get those studies that I was being asked for, and even better if I could do that abroad. So I found a university in the UK, the University of Manchester, where I studied my master's in finance. And then when I was there, I decided to do a little bit more in other institutions. But that's the reason, Paul, why I ended up moving to the UK for a couple of years.
I mean, I do somehow believe that let's say the same year. I mean, the same year we were born, roundabout. So I'm mid of 80s. So I do like to guess that we are on a bit from the same period. Let's say it like this. And I do remember that awful period where nobody was willing to hire you, and they were always using the same experience. Yeah? But the same excuse, like, you have no experience. Like, you have no experience, you have no experience. But how can I get experience? Nice. I mean, from the development sounds amazing, but what was the family reaction when you said, okay, I'm moving on the other side of the planet?
Yes, of course. But first of all, I have to thank you, Paul, because I'm not of the mid 80s. I'm of 78. So now I know the secret why all your guests love you. Because you missed that age part on purpose.
No,
so
it's an honest feedback. I mean, it's a
Thank you, Paul. Well, no, let me tell you. So of course, it was probably not something that was widely discussed at home. I think they knew I had to study something abroad to be able to have better chances when I came back to Mexico, because that was always the plan, no, to go study something abroad and then come back and find a good job. But then tying this to my age, Paul, I came back to Mexico right when the Twin Tower situation had happened, right after that. So it was basically impossible to find a job in finance during that period of time. And then you can imagine the very harsh situation when I came back, and this is actually true. For 10 months, I wasn't able to find a job with a master's in the UK.
So basically, all the effort, the feeling of that was for nothing, right?
Exactly. It was for nothing. And then, of course, we have all these dreams. I'll go somewhere else as an expat. I'll have all these experiences, and then I'll come back and make more money, because that's probably how many of us think. I came back, Paul, as I said, 10 months later, no job. And the first job that I got, and the only job offer that I got, was to be an intern for a bank. And that was the reason why now I still keep working in this industry as my day job, because of that result after the studies.
Oh my God, Esteban! I have to say I appreciate your motivation to push forward, because I think the level of frustration that you must have had in that moment, it must have been huge. So you think about you went out abroad, you studied, you invested time, you invested effort, you invested money for sure, because it's not cheap, and then you go back and you have like that crash. All the respect for that.
True, Paul. And sorry to interrupt you, but I think this 30 seconds will inspire probably some of your listeners. I remember after coming back and finding no job one night, and this is actually again true, in my pajamas, Paul, I had sent by then already hundreds of resumes, and then Googling the name of someone in a bank to whom I could send my CV. And then, of course, lots of names came. And then I started to come up with their email. How could this person's email look like? And then I tried a few of them, and then one of them worked. So to all of those in a similar situation, you never know what kind of strategy will push you where you want to be.
That's an amazing story. That's at the end pushing your limits to reach your goals, right? Esteban, what was the report between expectation and reality when you first reached UK?
It's a great question, because again, it was I think my first real life experience with what you said, expectations. And it was not only after 20 years that I learned how to manage those expectations. So speaking about that, Paul, I had this image of the UK in my mind that we see, in movies, that we see in the school's advertisement. And my first experience, Paul, was arriving maybe on a Sunday evening. It was raining, of course, extremely cold. I was completely alone, and then it was not until I closed the door of my dorm, of my room, and finding myself there alone inside my room with that weather. I remember it was again like 3-4 in the afternoon, and it was completely dark. Then I realized that my expectations were wrong. No, it was not going to be like that. The 2 years that I had envisioned were not going to be like that, and then I had to adapt to the situation. It wasn't easy, Paul, but again, I had my family back in Mexico supporting me and telling me just hanging there for a day, for a couple of days, and then a day or 2 days became a week, and then a couple of years.
It's something that it's much appreciated, I think, when the family is sitting on your side and say, hey, take one day at a time, and you see the progress every day, and you see the big steps that you are making, because at the end there is no one who's able to make 10,000 steps, big steps in the first time. You have to start with the small steps. But really, all the respect again, because I think that's what family should be for.
Exactly.
For sure. I will stick a bit to UK, because I find I find the difference. I mean, the cultural difference between Mexico and UK must have been like sky and earth size. Sorry. And I want to ask you, what was except rain, you mentioned rain, but what was the immediate cultural difference that you've seen in the first days, weeks when you arrived in UK?
I'll tell you, Paul, it was very clear. It was how students behaved. When I was back in Mexico and during all my life, and of course my undergrad studies, there was let's say a known way of behaving in school, more I would say on the relaxed front. I studied, of course, but I could pass a test by studying a couple of days before I had it, things like that, you know. When I went and had my first experiences in the UK's university, that's when I realized that modus operandi was very different outside in Mexico. Because then again, the school was very, very cosmopolitan in that sense. There were students from China, from India, from many other parts of the world. They were extremely competitive, and then that was one, again, an expectation that didn't materialize. And then the other one, Paul, was the way teachers taught. You know, in Mexico, it was more of a explanation, and then you took notes, and then you studied your notes, and then you passed. In this case, the teachers were there just to solve specific questions about a topic. But if you hadn't studied that topic before or read about it, you of course had no questions. So there was no need for you to be in the classroom, and that again was a shock. So I went, Paul, from being one of the top students in Mexico to being one of the worst at the beginning, until I ramped up and got the feeling of how it was done there.
So basically, everything that was taught in class, it was not actually taught; it was yours to investigate.
Exactly.
And then the question, interesting point of view. I don't know that as well. Romania is also more on the Mexican side where they explain stuff.
Yes.
But also, I think there is a bit of a difference in the way people are, let's say, also talking to each other. I know the Mexican way. I do suppose it's like the Latin way of behaving, like being more warm, more loud. Let's say it like this. When the English, I'm not saying they are colder, because that's also not true, but they have a short and direct way of communicating. Was that hard to handle at the beginning?
I didn't have a lot of interaction with locals because again my day was completely full. No classes from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, so I only had the interaction with the other students, which were always changing between lectures. I think it was probably because a lot of those students were foreign. And for them, being there was extremely expensive, so they had to be super focused that there was no possibility of really having very deep connections, no? And that was again something very different. But I clearly remember how focused, again, competitive, and really targeting the best results that all these people were, and that was again something that I had to adapt quickly. And years later, Paul, I realized that that's probably more of the real world for an expat, having very, very tough competition, because now the world is open to anybody.
Like, it's the same like in football. I don't know if you're a football fan, but when you play in your home field, like, every piece of grass that you have, how the ball is jumping and so on. Mm-hmm. But when you change, like, you have a different kind of publicum. You don't know the publicum, so you don't know your competition. You don't really know the field that you're playing on. And then it's the amount of people coming to let's say, get you in, not directly get you, but on a theoretical way. But good, a really nice analogy. I like it. I never thought about this. Yeah. I'm not asking about the language barrier or not the language barrier, but the Manchester accent, I think it's something that most of us have heard already, and we know it's not the easiest accent to handle. Yeah. But since you haven't had a lot of contact with the locals at the beginning, I think by the time you manage to have contact with the locals, you actually already heard it often enough so that you can get used to it, right?
Yes, of course. By then, you start picking up some of the slang words and the speed, of course, which makes a difference. But my teachers were all of them people from the UK, from different places. So yeah, the language barrier, even if you speak the language, can be a barrier. Even if you speak English, getting used to the tone, to the accent, to the speed, as I said. No joke, Paul, but I speak Spanish, and whenever I look at a movie on Netflix that is from Spain, this is a secret. I have to put subtitles. Imagine.
uh, I have a work colleague which is from Colombia,
Yeah.
and she says the same, that you think it's all Spanish, but it's not all Spanish.
Exactly.
Yeah, correct. And at the end, every foreign language that you learn in school, it's nice, it's amazing, it's good that you invest the time in it, but in the first moment when you get the live contact with that language is the actual moment in which you realize, I'm not speaking that language. No, I thought I am, I'm not.
Yeah. Of course, we speak the language to survive in our holidays, but then to work or to study, it's a different level. Correct.
Correct. Um, Maybe not so much in the expat topic, but I would be interested to know, was there a lot of bureaucracy in the whole process of studying in the UK? Did you had to fill in a lot of papers? How did that process flow run?
Yeah, no, it was again a different world that I had to get to know very quickly because applying for those universities and people who have done this or are doing this will immediately get what I'm trying to say. It's a completely different world. It's not just handing in your diplomas and the documents that you have readily available. No, it is also taking very specific tests, passing those tests with again very determined level grades, for example, and then not only that, but when you study in a different country, then probably, and that was my case, some of the documents that I had to be translated, and some of them even have to have an official stamp. So all of that takes time. All of that takes money because you need to learn again and maybe even have the support of some people. But I would say if you do it once, then you are very well positioned to do it again. And typically, for people that are thinking to study abroad, it is worth not only targeting the place that you most want, but probably another three, four, or five, because you never know what will work in one or another. And again, if you're going to do all that hard work for one, then you probably can leverage it for other, Paul.
At the end, you can share the effort, and maybe the benefit is also bigger than. I'm usually asking a question, but usually later in the discussion. But I think it's appropriate now. When did you know you are not a kid anymore? In that constant, did it happen in that context in with the move to UK? Because I always like to identify, to think reflexively and think about when was the moment when I realized, oh, I'm a grown up now. I'm not a kid anymore. And I'm asking, did that experience that you have had somehow made you realize, oh, I think I'm a grown up now. I'm not a kid anymore.
Well, Paul, again, this might surprise you or maybe not, but I, even now at my 46 years of age, I'm not sure I stopped being a kid. I have to confess that there are times when I get afraid, when I get anxious, no, when I get worried, that I remember and would like to go back to those times when I crawled into my parents onto my parents' bed and slept with them. No, there are times when I am very playful, like a kid. Times when I daydream. So I'm not sure I stopped being a kid, but probably the first time that I realized I was playing with the big boys was back then because I started to see things that I had never seen. No, let me give you a very quick example. Speaking about university, that was the first time that I saw people renting 2, 3, or 4 copies of the same book in the library for the other people not to have it, you know? And that to
Oh
me
my
was a
God.
shock, because why would anybody rent 4 copies of the same book? No? And then my kid had to wake up, the kid inside me had to wake up and realize, again, I was playing with the big boys and I had to learn the rules.
I mean, that's a hell of a story. It's a shark world, right? And
Yes.
you always have to be aware of your competition. That's something I never heard before. I'm completely honest with you, but absolutely a fair point. Um, Esteban, I would switch slowly to Switzerland because
Yes.
Switzerland is it's a possible dream for everyone because everyone is thinking so high about Switzerland. First question, have you chose the country or you chose the job when you moved to Switzerland?
Well, first of all, yes, Switzerland is a dream country, just to say it loud and clear. But no, I was actually already dreaming about moving to Switzerland one day, no, years ago. And that was the result of me visiting Switzerland during holidays and looking at a country where I thought, this is a place where I would like to live. First of all, it is safe. Everything is in order, and I like the culture. Of course, the scenery comes out from a book, and I loved it. So I was dreaming about moving to Switzerland and already trying different things to potentially achieve that. And again, this is an interesting story because it reinforces the fact that you never know where opportunities will come from. The only reason that I was hired by a Swiss bank to move to Switzerland was because one of the people that I worked with before for a different bank many years before had been hired, and then that person spoke well about me. So and again, it was someone. Don't think it was the CEO of the previous bank. No, it was a colleague, and this again just reinforces that we need to be authentic and supportive and good people with everybody, independently of their job title, of who they are, because again, you never know how life will pay back that positive contribution that you had to someone.
This says a lot about you, Esteban. At the end, and we have to say it like this because at the end, it's really important. Like you say, we are living in a shark times, like you mentioned before. So everyone wants to eat everyone, but on the other side, you have to know that we also have to help each other. And I think the fact that we are able to work together and not against each other is the thing that can change this world. And I think this says a lot about you, and I have to say that's a really nice thing because at the end, that's the biggest commercial or marketing that you can make for yourself. Just try to be a positive person for the people around you, and then good things will happen. When and how, you never know. And maybe one of the most important things that I always say, we should not expect the good deeds to come back from the same people that we made the good deeds for.
Absolutely.
Just the good things are coming back.
Absolutely. And that's again a great lesson, Paul. Thanks for highlighting that because we get sometimes frustrated that we are so good to some people and so supportive, and they behave completely the opposite way, and that frustrates us. But as you said, life has different ways of paying us back, and it typically is the situation that payback comes from a very different source.
The problem is that, and I think that's the issue for a lot of persons. They don't make the connection. They don't make the connection between the 2 points, and everybody's frustrated and said, I helped that guy a lot, but I got also some good things for this guy that I never had something to do with it, or I just behave normal too." But that's the important, that you have to connect one with one and say, okay, maybe that was the reason behind it.
Yeah.
Esteban, the question, expectation and reality for Switzerland.
That's you are touching on a very sensitive topic for many people who move to Switzerland, because Switzerland again is a very particular country. I always say the fact that it works perfectly like a Swiss watch has a lot to do with very limited room to maneuver, and you are expected to behave in a certain way. And then if you break the rules, you have to run the risks and bear the costs. And the society in Switzerland lives by those rules, which is something amazing, because it allows you to breathe and to have confidence in that the rest will behave in a certain way. When I arrived to Switzerland, Paul, it was the first time I was having a coffee in a Starbucks in Zurich. So it was not a town in the middle of nowhere. It was a Starbucks in Zurich. And I saw the person next to me stand up and go to the restroom. The only thing is that person left on the table the MacBook, the iPhone, the purse, and came back only 10 minutes later. Nobody had any sort of temptation. And that just tells you a lot about a society that is really amazing. So I've had lots of positive surprises, and again, situations that to me just reinforce how we should all behave. And it has, as I said, it has a side that demands from us effort, because we all need to make an effort to follow those rules and not say, but just for today, I'm not following the rule. No, it's always. And if you do that, you can definitely have a very happy life here, Paul.
I have to say, talking about intercultural differences, that's a huge thing, and I think the difference between Mexico and Switzerland for you, and in my case Romania and Germany, even though the distance is not the same, but I think we are kind of alike, Romanian with Mexicans. So we are bending some rules. We like to find always the shortcut. And it's important for the others to obey to the rules, not for us, because we always have to find our way in between the rules and so on. and that was something that was also impressive for me when I came in Germany. I was talking to a colleague of mine, and he told me, we are not that correct because we like to be that. We are afraid of fights because they fine everyone for everything, and at one moment you realize, okay, I have to stop because we all have to respect the rules. And for me, one of the biggest cultural shocks, and I think somehow the match between Switzerland and Germany somehow, from this point of view, from the integrity of the person's point of view, the same. I was walking down the street going for lunch with a colleague of mine, and there was a guy pulling a bike that was connected to a pillar. And I just passed by because at the end, not my bike, not my problem. And the colleague of mine said, I don't think it's his. He's steering it. I will go and tell the police. And then there was such a big question mark in my, why do you care? Why?
Yes.
And this is the big change that we have to have on all of us on our personal level, so that we end up having this integrity where we say, okay, even though it's not ours, there's a thing which is not right happening, so we have to help somehow to correct it.
It's integrity. You said it, Paul. It's not following the rule just not to get fined, No, it's following the rule because it's the right thing to do.
And and of course they have their dried trees in the forest because
Yes,
you
of course.
cannot have a perfect forest.
No.
But at the end, it's like this.
Yeah.
Talking about Switzerland and being myself, no, I would say I managed to somehow develop my German skills in the last period, so I'm proud of that. But one of my first 2, 3 trips to Switzerland were the moment in which I realized they don't speak German. They speak a language which they forgot the vowels out of it, and it sounds like a continual interjection. How was the language barrier at the beginning?
Well, I had an advantage, which was that I speak German. So I went to the German school in Mexico, and then when
Okay.
I moved to Switzerland, I did speak German. But as you say, Swiss German is a completely different language. It could be called something else. Maybe some words are similar, but it was a language variable, and it still is because even though I've tried to learn some words and really uh, get closer to Swiss German. To me, it is a difficult language because my brain tries to connect it with German, and then of course some things are very different, and I simply have to learn some of the things. And yeah, 6 years later, there are already some terms that I use that make me look less of an expat in the country. But you know what? Swiss people are extremely welcoming. Remember that Switzerland is a country where almost 30% of people are expats
Wow.
in some way or another, and that's one. And then Swiss people are incredible in this sense because you often find people that speak 4, 5 languages, but perfectly, Paul, perfectly. So I always get a lot of help from the locals whenever I'm trying to use my Swiss German and I'm failing. Then they go out and help me in German or in English.
That's extremely nice, and I didn't know about the 30%. I knew always that it's an let's say it's an expat nation per definition, Switzerland, but I didn't know that there are 30%, so quite a lot. I realized as well during my trips that they speak English and they are willing to speak English as well, so
Yes.
they are not pushing you away, so they are used to it. Um, Esteban, how was the the getting settled process in Switzerland? Was that complicated? I mean, did you need a work permit? You haven't need a work permit. How was the process of opening a bank account and so on?
Yes, of course. It is extremely complicated, Paul. Again, I had an advantage because I am also a German citizen. So I have a German passport, and in that sense, it is easier to get hired in
Hmm.
Switzerland. It is not, it is not completely straightforward because, as far as I know, a Swiss company still needs to show that there was no Swiss person that could perform that job, and therefore they had to opt for a European individual. So that's one. But for people that don't have a European citizenship or passport, then it starts to become very difficult because for them to be hired, at least that Swiss company needs to show that there was no Swiss person nor a European person able to perform that job. So then you probably have to be extremely specialized in a given task. That was one. Then, second, there are, of course, a lot of requirements that you need to meet. One of them is again very linked to the company that is hiring you, because the Swiss government doesn't want you to come and then 1 month later to find yourself without a job. Because
Hmm.
then remember, Switzerland is a country that takes care
Hmm.
about these kind of things with insurance, etc. So that was difficult. And then finally, Paul, just not to extend myself here, the other thing that was very difficult and still is related to prices. When I came to Switzerland and started to realize how expensive it was to live in Switzerland, then of course another one of those expectations had to come, had to be aligned with reality. You often hear about people making money in Swiss francs, and you say, "Wow, these people are getting rich." No, the reality is not that. In Switzerland, you have to pay very high prices for lots of things, and then in the end, it is not a situation where you end up saving a lot. So that is still, as I said, an expectation that I'm slowly trying to make my peace with. But that's Switzerland. You want to live in a first class country, you have to pay first class prices.
I think I think one of the famous quotes that I learned in university, to come back to university, was that from, I think, Oliver Holmes, was that I like to pay taxes because by paying taxes I buy civilization. And at the end, that's something which is correct. But I know as well that the level of taxation that you have in Switzerland is high, and also the cost of living. It's, let's say, aligned with the salaries. I would say it. There are a lot of German people who live on the border, behind the border in Germany, and then they work in Switzerland. They have a special rule in which they are allowed to do this. So I think that's also something which is happening quite often. But how you said it was a huge shock for you, and it's still something that it's hard to get used to it. But thinking now, in, let's say it like this, you've lived in Mexico, you worked in Mexico, you lived in Switzerland, you worked in Switzerland. Talking purely on a percentage level, on a share level, how big is the difference between the share of cost of living from the salary in Mexico and share of cost of living from the salary or from the income in Switzerland?
It's not that different, Paul. It's not that different. I would say again, if you do your job, which is budgeting, anticipating your expenses, maybe I always say, no, we have to work, we have to save, and then we have to invest. And by invest, I don't mean Warren Buffett style. No, we just need to try to get something out of the little money that we can put in the bank. But if we are able to do the three things and then pace ourselves in terms of expenses, I think you can have a very decent life. And the same thing in Mexico, because yes, a lot of things are cheaper, but then also the salaries are cheaper. I would say in both cases, you are able to probably save a little bit, and no different than probably than in Romania or in Germany. And then by year end, if you did things well, you can have some nice holidays and or spend that money with your family. But it's not a situation where you are barely making the as they say, ends meet. No, you do have some capacity to save.
I think the most important message, and I tried to explain it several times when I was talking to my friends as well, and because everybody is expecting when you have let's say a management position, or when you have a higher position in one of these Western countries, that you for sure make about 700 million euros every month, and then you have not enough cards to get the money from the ATM. Yeah. And I always try to explain that the fact that the cost of living it's aligned with the salaries. It is like this, and as much as the salary is going out, the cost of living is going up. And of course, on a share percentage, you're not left with more than you were left initially. For sure, you are living in a nice country. We talked about it. Like it's an amazing country. You are living. You can visit a lot of places. You have the proximity of several things that you can do. So you have advantages, because that's why you pay taxes. At the end, that's the break-even point. That's the benefit of it.
Exactly.
Esteban, how's the process of finding a house? In one of the previous episodes, I was explaining that one of the biggest cultural shocks that I had in Germany was that I went to visit the apartments and I realized they have no furniture and I have to buy all the furniture.
Same thing here, Paul. I of course had to travel a few weeks before my actual job started to look for an apartment. And the first thing that I found, Paul, and that again, I had never lived this before, was that there is competition for apartments. And you have to hand in your documents, and then you are almost even tested, and like trying to join a university. And that I had never lived that before. That was one, and not because the apartments are very cheap. No,
I'm sorry for interrupting. I want to say one thing. I told this story to a friend of mine. I said, imagine the worst job interview that you had. This is worst. So getting an apartment is worse than that. Sorry
it's
for
worse than that
interrupting.
because you don't know what to answer there.
Exactly.
So yeah, no, that was a shock. And then, as you said, I managed to rent a little apartment. Again, it was much smaller than what I used to have back in Mexico, because again here I was paying Swiss francs, and what you said is totally true. I think the only entity that is winning from all of this is called IKEA, because the next day I had to go to IKEA and buy that emergency furniture, which, by the way, I still have it, top quality. I have no complaints. But yeah, I think it's again a situation that we almost, for those that we don't live here, we don't foresee the fact that we will at best find a small empty place that we will have to fill in with furniture quickly, because
And if you are extremely, extremely lucky, you might get the kitchen furnished, but you have to be extremely lucky.
extremely lucky. I agree.
So you came to Switzerland, like you said, a few weeks before. You had your apartment. You visited the regular IKEA store. By the way, I think I spent the most money in my life in IKEA. There is no other company
Yeah.
as its own to which I give so much money. Did you knew someone when you moved to Switzerland? Did you know? You said you had a work colleague that you knew before.
Yes, I had that work colleague, but unfortunately he had already moved to a different place, and so no, I didn't. But it was again not difficult at all, because the processes are already so standard for expats that you can access the websites in English. You can bid for the apartment in English. The person that is there to interview you speaks English, so that was no problem. What I did struggle a little bit with, Paul, was afterwards the whole topic about insurance, because you have to have insurance for the home, you have to have insurance for damages to third parties, you have to have all sorts of insurances that I didn't know about. So I would say my suggestion to anybody in that sense is there are, again, brokers that are very specialized for expats that can give you, in a nutshell, whatever you will need.
Amazing point, Esteban. Amazing point with the insurances. I think that was one of the hardest thing that I had to navigate on my own. So the Hausrat, Haftpflicht, and all the other names that are there, and they are getting every month the money from my bank account. I don't even know how and why. And I said, okay, it is how it is. I have to do it, and so on. An interesting fact in Germany, which I find out from a colleague of mine, which find it out the hard way. If someone is falling in front of your house during winter season, it goes on your insurance. Because it's your fault that you haven't cleaned in front of the house so that he could slip and fall.
Imagine, Paul. No, I agree. All these kind of things, you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared, and and get the support. The beauty about the beauty of being an expat is that there are lots of forums of expats in all these countries, Germany, Switzerland, and many other, that can support you. But yeah, don't try to do it alone, because the process might be painful and very long. And people, are willing to lend a hand and give you some advice.
Exactly. Did you? I will move now a bit from the, let's say, from the official part to more to the social part. Did you manage to build a community, to make some connections with some people, so that you can build a small friends group? Let's say it like this.
Yes, of course. I think part of that is really, it comes from us. No, we need to make an effort to get interested about the culture and the people. And we were saying, learn some words in that language, and you will see, at least in my case, people are welcoming. People are happy to engage. People are interested in listening to your stories about the other countries and your experiences. So that hasn't really been an issue, but again, we need to be careful that without losing our own cultural background, we also integrate to the culture that is welcoming us. Because just saying, I'm Mexican and I will only operate here as a Mexican, it will get you nowhere, and will cause friction. But if you keep that authenticity, and get interested in the culture, as I said, that's welcoming you, again, that's a win-win for everybody.
I always say that the big benefit of the multicultural environments is exactly this: the fact that everyone is bringing his own input, but at the end they are all behaving based on the same rules. And I think that's something which makes this. It's if it's Germany, if it's, I don't know, Switzerland, it makes life itself nicer, because you have the benefits of a lot of cultural experiences. And I was saying the other day, the huge benefit, for example, that I've seen in Germany, when I go and eat at an Italian restaurant, it's hosted by Italian guy. When I go and eat at an Indian restaurant, it's hosted by an Indian guy. And this is something that I didn't knew from Romania. And this is something that brings the communities together for sure.
Of course.
I switched the topic to food. I have to ask you about food. First of all, what do you miss the most from Mexico?
Well, so food is a perfect example, because Mexican food is known to be one of the tastiest out there, and that I miss. But again, I don't have to miss that food too much, because there are plenty of Mexican restaurants that are available here. So I've been able to find good alternatives. And again, I love the Swiss options. There probably the downside is that there are lots of very tasty things in Switzerland, starting with chocolate and cheese and bread. So no complaint on the food department, Paul.
Okay, that's really important, because at the end, in most of the cases, food is a comfort thing. But I think the benefit of the Mexican food, besides the fact that it's delicious, I have to say, the benefit of it is that you find a lot of Mexican restaurants in Europe as well. And in the meantime, they are chains of different restaurants that you can eat for them. Of course, not the quality. I'm pretty sure they're not the quality that you had back home, but still a good quality of food. What's your favorite Swiss food? Is it chocolate?
Chocolate is definitely one of them, but one of my surprises, Paul, was bread. Bread is something that I cannot explain how magnificent it is, how it smells. It is always baked freshly, and the first thing that you smell when you walk through the train station or some of the streets is bread. So I invite everybody to try Swiss bread. It's amazing.
It's crazy how happy we get with this from the small things. It's
Yes.
unbelievable. It's like nobody's coming and saying I like foie gras and no bread,
No, no,
because at the end the basics are the most important.
totally.
Um, is there a place in Switzerland which becomes special to you?
You know, anything and everything related to nature, because Switzerland is such a beautiful place. If you like nature, you can get lost in the mountains, in the forest, in the fields. So I love having, if possible, everyday experience with nature, even if it's a quick walk. Of course, during the weekends, something a little bit more sophisticated, like hiking. But Swiss nature is something again unseen for many, and the beauty that I again hopefully many people can try it.
True. I'm passing quite often through Switzerland. I'm while going to Italy, driving by car, and man, the driving on the highway in Switzerland is a unique experience by itself. So I
Yes.
think I've never seen such a beautiful highway view. You don't have any, maybe in Austria for some parts, for sure, in Tyrol and so on, but not. It's amazing. Um, is there something that you find out in the last 6 years since you live in Switzerland about Switzerland that you have the feeling that not enough people know about? So, of course, we talk about cliches like chocolate and watches and so on, but is there something that you find out by living there that you say, I think this is something that not so many people know about Switzerland?
Yeah, I would say many people assume, and you've probably also heard this about people in Germany. Many people assume, or I've heard the term that the locals are cold people. No, cold people, like implying they are individuals that want to remain far away from the other ones. And I have to say that's absolutely not the case. They are extremely welcoming, extremely warm. Of course, like anybody, they have their own culture, but I've had no bad experience on that front, and I would say they are as welcoming as anybody I've known in Mexico or in any other country.
I always try to explain this as well, that there is no perfect forest. I'm saying the same expression again. You always have a forest where you have 2, 7, 50, I don't know how many dry trees, but the people are still people everywhere, and you find good ones, you have bad ones. These cliches that they are cold, that nobody's getting attached to. Everyone has their own way of living, but I think the general, I'm fully with you. I think this is a wrong impression that you have, or a misconception that you have about some countries. Um, you've spent some holidays in Switzerland, some Christmas holidays. I mean now, and
Yeah.
I think a huge particularity of this area of Europe are the Christmas markets. Was that something new, a new experience for you, or you had it before in Mexico as well?
No, those markets are again from only, at least in my case, seen in movies. They are beautiful. They are so full of light, so full of food, so full of music and life and happiness. And then of course you have the weather contributing positively because it snows, and indeed the Christmas markets are something to experience. And if people are thinking about visiting Switzerland, clearly December is a month that they should test.
Absolutely, and I cannot recommend enough the Christmas market in Zurich. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
It's
amazing.
absolutely amazing. Yeah. Um, you said you were mentioning at the beginning that you started by having a job in the banks in the finance area. Then you said, okay, you went a bit more through this expat, let's say, experiences. Um, what's one thing that you learn about yourself during this expat experience that you have had?
Well, one thing that I learned about myself, Paul, is that I can't do everything alone, that I need help, that I need support, and that I need to be, vocal about needing that help because many times I try to do things alone, many times, and it might be for many reasons, but one of them is not to bother other people. And in reality, this experience here living in Switzerland and being an expat has taught me that I need to be open and willing to ask for help because I can't do everything alone. And even more important, Paul, there are so many people willing and happy to help, actually waiting for that opportunity to help, that asking for help is not a burden on someone. It is really the opportunity for someone to contribute, as we said at the beginning, to have a positive contribution in someone else's life. So that's a great lesson.
Do you think that that some of this let's say motivation not to ask for help is coming also from the fact that you have the feeling that your ego is being affected due to the fact that you are not able to handle everything on your own?
It can be, definitely it can be because and in my case, I grew up thinking that I need to do things alone, that I need to be the best, that I need to be the smartest, the strongest, the bravest, and not asking for help is a wrong way to looking at this kind of things because not asking for help only makes you weaker, only makes you weaker, only makes you less intelligent. But again, the ego sometimes doesn't allow us to look at it that way, and that is something that with some life experiences I've come to learn.
I've realized more, and I have to say one of the things that widely opened my eyes about this was a really a great book that I read was the book from Ryan Holiday, Ego is the Enemy. And I think that was the moment in which I realized, oh, it's nobody else that wants to do anything bad to me. It's just me that I'm afraid to ask for help because I feel that I'm weaker if I ask for help. In which in fact the quite opposite is correct. So in most of the cases, what would be the one piece of advice? I know that you are working with expats now. I did a bit of research, let's say like this. I don't like to call stalking because it sounds bad, but I did a bit of research. I know that you work with expats, and I think not only from your experience, but you have, let's say, multiple experience. What would be if you'd have to say, Esteban, you have to give one advice to someone that wants to move abroad. What would be that one thing that you think they should know?
The thing that I would tell them, Paul, is do it. Don't listen to the fear that's coming and coming over and over in your head in different ways, negative self-talk, imposter syndrome, anxiety. Don't listen to it. Do it. Follow your dream. Make that life somewhere else a reality for you. You will work things out. You will learn. You will ask for help. You will make mistakes, but nothing bad will happen. So if you're thinking about being an expat or you are just starting to live that expat experience, be sure it can be the best experience in your life. Set aside that fear and simply enjoy the ride.
Do you think that the fact that you became an expat made you also willing to develop yourself into this consulting on this consulting part?
Definitely yes, Paul, because I realized how recurrent it was among the people that I talked to, some of the feelings and emotions that I was going through, and how difficult at some point it was to find that help. So once I realized that there were many people in the same situation I was, that's when I thought, well, why not helping them in a professional way? And being a coach and a certified life coach is a way for me to provide that support and to help them achieve the goals they have in mind.
And your experience is recommending you for that. I have to be honest. I mean, the switch that you made, the comfort zone that you left. I mean, even I left my comfort zone, but it's not that far away. But you had to leave it really far away so that you can do these steps. And I think your attitude is recommending you for that. And I have to say, when I started this process, I think the first 6 months. 8 months, I thought about going back a lot of times. And I think I'm not the only one. I'm pretty sure that it's happening for everyone, because I think, why am I doing this? There is no reason. And I would have been happy to find someone like you to give me the support, to give me only to tell me, man, just chill, just do it one by one. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. But this impulse you need from someone who already understands what you're going through, because I think that's the hardest part, because you hear it from your friends, you hear it from but you don't know if they really meant it or they just say it because they have to say it. So Esteban, I would like to ask you to tell me a funny story that you have had as an expat, an experience where you said, okay, it was cringe when I lived it, or it was not so comfortable, but now if I remember about it, I can only laugh every time.
Well, you will love this, Paul. But one time, while riding the train here in Switzerland, very early in the morning, going to work, I was listening to my music in my AirPods, and suddenly a lady touches my arm, and I see her complaining about something. So I take one of the AirPods to try to understand, and then I realized that the lady was complaining about me listening to the music too loud in my AirPods. Of course, when that happened to me, I said, this is the extreme. Cannot be. How is it possible that someone complains about music in someone else's AirPods? When 6 years later, I'm very bothered by people listening to music in their AirPods.
So I would say now is the perfect time to apply for citizenship. You get it for sure.
Yes, exactly.
That's a really nice one. Esteban, what's the most? I know it's usually for us. Usually when we go on a different continents, what's a nice experience to try. When I said for us, I meant for Europeans. I'm sorry for saying that, but it's like I'm always thinking about trying a fruit that I can only find there, trying to find to taste something or to make one experience that I only can do there. What was that one thing? I think fruit. Switzerland is not famous for any kind of particular fruit, so I would say not necessarily fruit, but something that you can only find in Switzerland.
Well, something that you can only find in Switzerland, I would say, would probably have to do with, again, cheese, and a very particular cheese. No, there is a cheese called raclette that you find in Switzerland, but the beautiful thing about that cheese is how you eat it. You eat it in family or with friends, and it is a cheese that is eaten slowly, and the perfect kind of food to have long nights with friends and family, chatting, discussing things, having a good time, and the perfect example of slow food rather than the fast food we are used to.
The enjoyment of food. I know raclette.
Exactly.
I discovered raclette in Germany myself as well. I didn't know it before. Is there the same habit in Switzerland that you have it on New Year's Eve night?
Yes, of course. You have it then, maybe Christmas and maybe other
Exactly.
celebrations. Definitely when you go up the mountain to ski, it is again a great excuse to have long hours with friends and family.
Absolutely, fully recommended. It's an amazing food experience, especially because you are in control about not only about your food but about everything. That it's an amazing experience for anyone who hasn't tried it. They should try raclette. It's amazing. We're closely coming to the end. It's an enjoyment to talk to you, I have to say, and
Thank you.
I don't want it
Likewise.
to be finished. I would like to ask you if someone would consider No, why someone would consider Switzerland to move to in as an expat?
I would say if you are definitely looking for a style of life that is, you know, um, much more aligned, as I said, with nature, much more aligned with small towns, much more aligned with a very cosmopolitan city like it is Zurich, or it can be Bern or Lucerne or Geneva. Then Switzerland is really the place. There are lots of industries that are very big in Switzerland, but also not as big that you can get lost inside a company. It is a country that is very much founded on family and friends and relationships, and very personal. So Switzerland is a great option for someone that wants to live a life with lots of family values, close to nature, and in a setting that is very safe and very welcoming again.
You made a good point for Switzerland, I have to say. So you almost convinced me. I'm not that far away. Sensitive question, and I always struggle to ask it. But does you mentioned a lot nature, but how does happiness look like for you, Esteban?
Happiness, something that I've come to learn about happiness, Paul, is that it is not something that we reach at some point in life. It is in the small moments in our everyday, the cup of coffee in the morning, the sight of a beautiful scenery when I'm in the train, the laugh of friends, that raclette at night. If we keep pursuing happiness as if it is a goal that we will reach by some time, we are wrong. We need to find it every day in the very small things. And if we do, then we have a happy life guaranteed.
Absolutely, that's such a good point. I always like to say also that the happiness is for the person who enjoys more the way than the goal, because the goal is lasting for this long and the way is lasting for that long.
Exactly.
So, nice, really nice point. Thank you for this. Where is home, Esteban?
Where is home? Well, home, home is where you feel so relaxed that you can be the person that you are, where you don't have to pretend that you are someone, where you are at ease and in peace with the people that surround you. That's home, and it can be Switzerland, Mexico, Romania, Germany. It can be anywhere. We define where home is for us, and therefore we have all the capacity to name home anywhere we want.
That's an amazing way of saying it. Home is not a location; it's a feeling. My feeling somehow as well. So before we finish, Esteban, I would love if you can make for me first thing first, and then for the other viewers of this podcast, a book recommendation.
Of course, Paul, and it's a great question, and one we didn't plan, but it allows me to speak about the three books that I've written and published. All of them are on Amazon. Actually, you can see them behind me. And it's not because I wrote them, but I really believe that in each one of them, there are valuable thoughts and lessons for people that are going through some sort of life change or life transition, like expats do, and that need for one time or for many times or continuously that extra inspiration, motivation, and push. So those three books, one of them is called 5 Minute Inspiration, the other one, Stories That Inspire, and the third one, Inspiring Life Transitions. And in all of them, people can find different things. Maybe like in Inspiring Life Transitions, daily thoughts, or in Stories That Inspire, you can have not only the stories that can resemble what people are going through, but also some thoughts and opinions that the experts have on the different topics like, feeling sadness, loneliness, fear. We spoke about it. And then 5 minute inspiration with some things that people can read while they are on the train. So those three books I suggest. I definitely believe there is value for people to find in them.
Thank you so much. That's something that I appreciate a lot. I will be the first one doing it because I love reading. I'm one of the old guys, and I like to say this also through my work colleagues because reading is not something that everyone is doing it. But I enjoy this. I still enjoy the smell of books. I
Oh,
have to say,
the best.
and and it's strange, but it is like this. Could you also do a movie recommendation for us, please?
Yes, of course. So movies, maybe you will also find this movie, one movie that needs to be highlighted. But this is my favorite movie, Paul, and it will again speak about my past. My favorite movie is Gladiator. No, Gladiator, the original Gladiator. I love that movie, Paul, because it is really a movie that speaks about values, a movie that speaks about courage and resilience, someone that had everything against him and how he pushed forward. And there are lots of thoughts in that movie about the family and life and the afterlife, which is something that again I appreciate. So if people have the opportunity to look at Gladiator, I think there are lots of lessons to find in there.
Absolutely an amazing movie, and I have a. It's one of my favorite movies as well. I think it's one of the biggest cinematic realization that happened before all the special effects and everything that we have now. That was an amazing movie. Funny story: Russell Crowe was invited in one podcast that I'm listening and said that he wanted to go for the last time with his mother in Rome last year before the second Gladiator is coming out because he said since he played in the Gladiator, he has a special treatment in Vatican always because they always said, "You are Massimo.
Yes,
You are
Mas.
Massimo." And I find that says a lot about the quality of the movie and what feelings is that movie raising for everyone watching it at the end.
Totally. I still have those goosebumps when I see that scene when Massimo takes the mask, no, and he speaks about himself, and a great movie with a perfect portrait of a leader and how a leader thinks and should act.
Correct. One last thing, one last recommendation. You said something about music. I'm a huge music fan. I'm always searching for new inspirations. Would you recommend a band, a song, something that helps you get some good feelings when you listen to it?
Yes, of course. I love all sorts of music, modern and music to dance, music to sing. But let me go off script here and speak about the music that is much older than I am. So I would again suggest for people to listen to Vivaldi's Four Seasons with a different mind. Imagine at that time a guy that was surrounded by other composers which were magnificent, but he managed to write a story around music. No, the Four Seasons and what the music was telling the listeners about the seasons, the birds, the rain, the wind. And once you read about how he presented his music to people, and how different it was, I think people can get a sense that it doesn't matter if you're living in the 1400s or now. There are always ways to look at things differently, and really think outside of the box. And if you do that, again, you will shine as a very different individual, like all of us are.
That's a perfect example of being yourself. That's a nice way to end this, and that's really important. That you have to be yourself. You should have yourself in focus. You should not try to make anyone happy. You should try to be yourself as you want it to be, because that's something that can only help your inner self. Esteban, I cannot thank you enough for the time that you shared with me today. It was an amazingly pleasant conversation, and not only that, but it was an amazing pleasure for me to get to know you.
Likewise, Paul.
And please tell people where they can find you if they would like to have some help in their daily life.
Of course, no. And first of all, thank you very much, Paul, because you opened this, this scenario for me, and interacting with you has been a pleasure, a conversation among friends. I really appreciate that. People can have access to me in many ways. There is my website, estebanpolidura.com. That's one. But then the more or the easiest ones are the different social media channels. So at Esteban Polidura, that's how you can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on TikTok. I am very active, posting content every day in different ways, videos, written content, and the content that I post is always my own content, original, and always with that touch of inspiration and motivation, not only value, but always trying to leave someone thinking that they can do this, that they are much stronger than they believe. So hopefully people can look at that.
We need this positivity. We need people like you, because I think that's important. I will link everything down in the show note captions, either if it's Spotify, YouTube, whatever. Whenever it will be posted, I will put the links to your social media channels. Thank you again, and hope to do this again sometime, because I really enjoyed it.
Of course, Paul, my pleasure. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for watching us.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Bye bye.